a closed hangar in August. Warm concrete under a nose wheel, a tie-down rope gone stiff in the sun. The airplane is not resting. Inside that engine, the camshaft has no bearings, and the oil film covering it started sliding off about 2 days after the last landing. Lycoming put that 2-day figure in a service letter in 2001. Almost nobody who owns one of these engines has read it. Which one are you right now? The owner who flew this month, or the owner whose airplane has not moved since spring? Put it in the comments. This is the kind of thing Sky Ranch takes apart. Subscribe so you catch the next one. Your crankshaft is protected. Your camshaft is not. That is not an opinion. That is geometry. The crankshaft rides inside bearings. Those bearings hold a film of oil against the metal even when the engine is cold and still. The camshaft gets nothing. It spins in grooves machined straight into the crankcase. Its lobes, and the lifter faces riding on top of them, sit fully exposed to whatever air moves through the inside of your engine. Air is always moving through the inside of your engine. Every piston engine has a breather tube. Its job is to stop the crankcase from pressurizing while the engine runs, and it does that job well. It also leaves an open path between the inside of your case and the weather outside your hangar. That path never closes, so the humidity walks in. Then the parts cool at different rates after shutdown, and moisture forms on the coldest metal it can find. On a Lycoming, the cam sits at the top of the engine. It is the last surface oil reaches on shutdown and the first one to go dry. Now add the part most owners never hear about. Water vapor in the air combines with sulfur in your fuel and your oil. What that makes is sulfuric acid. It makes it inside the case on the parts you cannot see. Rust needs about 45% humidity to get started. Below that, steel is mostly safe. Above it, the clock is running. The cam is exposed. It goes first. The engineers who built these parts knew all of this. Continental machines its camshaft from aircraft quality steel and carburizes the lobes, which case hardens the working surface. Then they coat those lobes in manganese phosphate to resist rust and cut friction during the first hours of running. The lifter body is cast iron, and the face gets chilled during casting to harden it. That is a lot of engineering aimed at one problem. None of it survives standing water. There is one condition that genuinely protects an idle engine, and it has to be earned before the airplane stops flying. Lycoming states that engines which have accumulated 50 hours or more in a short period build up a varnish on the cylinder walls. That varnish shields the metal. Those engines can sit for several weeks in good weather without corrosion damage. An engine flown hard in June survives a quiet July. An engine flown twice all spring does not. Where you keep it decides the rest. Lycoming singles out aircraft based near oceans, lakes, and rivers as needing far more protection than the ones in dry country. Mike Bush puts it more bluntly. With the possible exception of Hawaii and Puerto Rico, he says nowhere in the United States carries a higher corrosion risk than South Florida. This is why both engine makers publish a calendar limit that has nothing to do with hours. Lycoming Service Instruction 1009 says, every engine model should be overhauled within 12 calendar years of the day it entered service or the day it was last overhauled. The document states the reason in plain language: corrosion of the metal parts and breakdown of the gaskets, seals, hoses, and the fuel pump diaphragm. 12 years. The tach does not appear anywhere in that sentence. The newest revision of that document came out on the 20th of July, 2026, 3 weeks ago. The 12-year figure carried straight through. So did a smaller line buried above it, stating that the whole schedule assumes your engine runs at least once inside any 30-day period. If it will sit longer than 30 days, Lycoming sends you somewhere else. Service Letter L180B. That letter says, fly it 1 full hour, at oil temperatures between 165 and 200 degrees, at intervals no longer than 30 days. It specifies that the hour does not include your taxi, your takeoff, or your landing. Continental disagrees. Their guidance says the best way to hold off corrosion is flying the airplane at least once a week for a minimum of 1 hour. Once a month against once a week. A factor of 4 between two manufacturers on the same physical problem, and the technical portions of both documents carry FAA approval. That gap bothers me more than anything else in the paperwork. Two companies have built these engines side by side since the 1950s. They still cannot agree on what you are supposed to do with the airplane you already own. Continental at least tells you what happens past the deadline. Their service letter defines temporary storage as 30 to 90 days. That procedure wants preservative oil in the sump, an hour of running, and every cylinder sprayed through the spark plug hole. Past 90 days, the airplane enters what they call indefinite storage. At that point, the dehydrator plugs get a visual check every 15 days. If half of them or more have changed color, all the desiccant on the engine gets replaced. The cylinder bores get resprayed every 90 days for as long as the airplane sits. Read that schedule again and picture doing it. Almost no private owner does. The average general aviation aircraft flew 129 hours in 2022, according to the FAA's own activity survey. That number sounds healthy until you split it. A flight school 172 doing 400 hours a year drags that average up. The airplane parked 3 rows down from yours is what gets dragged along behind it. Continental will even pay you in hours to fly more. Their service manual offers 200 additional hours on top of the recommended time between overhaul for any engine consistently accumulating 40 or more hours per month. 40 hours a month. The manufacturer hands the bonus to the operators who never needed it. The calendar is the easy part to argue about. What actually empties a bank account is the 3 things owners do while the airplane sits. None of this is theory to the men who wrote it down. Mike Bush is an airframe and power plant mechanic with inspection authorization, and the FAA named him National Aviation Maintenance Technician of the Year in 2008. He co-founded AV Web. He has owned aircraft for 50 years. On the 1st of November 2018, his own Cessna 310 got grounded when its annual expired. He wrote the resurrection procedure afterward from the inside. Start with the habit that feels most responsible. You walk into the hangar every couple of weeks and pull the propeller through by hand. It seems obviously correct. You are moving the parts, spreading the oil around, keeping things from seizing. Lycoming's own service letter says pulling the engine through by hand is not recommended, and that it does more harm than good. The cylinder walls, the piston, the rings, the cam, and the cam follower do not get pressurized oil. They get splash and vapor. When you turn that propeller, the rings scrape down the cylinder walls and take the protective film with them. You are not circulating oil, you are wiping it off. Now the second one. This is the one that ended an engine belonging to a man who should have been immune to it. Matthew Dock co-founded a company called RPX Technologies in Oklahoma. He holds an airframe and power plant certificate with inspection authorization. He has a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Oklahoma State, and his academic focus was metallurgy, specifically surface finishes and cracks in metal. He owns 5 airplanes. He built Dynavibe, the market leader in propeller balancing. His Cessna 210 showed low compression on one cylinder. They pulled it. Behind it, they found a spalled cam lobe and lifter faces already chewed up. Then the shop split the case. The inside of that engine, in the words of the people looking at it, was like a swamp. Condensation and acidic oil residue had pitted the accessory gears. It had pitted the through bolts. It had reached parts that have nothing to do with the cylinder that started the conversation. The shop foreman worked out what had happened. Somebody had left the oil pan heater running all winter. The heater ran for months. It made steam. A metallurgist with 5 airplanes and an inspection authorization was beaten by a device he plugged in to protect the engine. That is the part I cannot get past. The failure did not come from neglect, it came from care applied in the wrong direction. That story does not fit the way most owners think about hangar time, which lands harder for you, that it happened to an A and P with a metallurgy degree, or that nobody found it until a cylinder went soft. Third habit. You stop by on a Saturday, start it on the ramp, run it 10 minutes, shut it down, and drive home feeling better. Oil has to get above roughly 185 degrees for about an hour to drive moisture out of the crankcase. 10 minutes on the ramp never gets close. What it does is pull fresh humid air through the breather, warm it, and leave it in there. One aviation writer described that exact procedure as building an acidic sauna. A ramp run is a moisture pump. 3 habits. Every one of them appears in the manufacturer's own published documents as a thing to avoid. Every one of them is something a conscientious owner does because he is trying to look after the airplane. None of that decides the size of the bill. Where the designer put your camshaft decides the size of the bill. On a Lycoming, the cam and the lifters sit above the crankshaft. There is no way to reach them without splitting the case. Once the case is open, you are looking at the crank anyway. At that point, the labor already spent makes a full overhaul the rational choice rather than a partial repair. One shop's published list price for an 0320 field overhaul is $31,650. An 0360 sits at $31,600. Go up to an IO540 and it is $50,500. Continental built it the other way around. Their camshaft sits below the crankshaft, driven by a gear set at half crank speed. On the big bore 360, 470, 520, and 550 series engines, Mike Bush describes the lifters as cheap and easy to replace. Same rust, same neglect, completely different invoice decided by a draftsman in the 1950s. Here is the number that should stop you. Kevin Knight owns a Cessna TR-182 in Texas. Writing in AOPA Pilot in September of last year, he put the replacement cost of the Lycoming on the nose of his 182 at north of $140,000 new. Individual cylinders for it run more than $1,600 apiece. The engine is worth more than most of the airframes it gets bolted to. And Continental's own service directive contains a line worth reading twice. Their warranty covers replacing the cam and lifters where distress is found, with one exception written into the document. It does not cover distress that originates from corrosion. Corrosion is the exact failure their directive tells you to inspect for, covered for everything except what actually happens. So what does a man with a hangar and no budget for a case split actually do? 3 tests, and none of them require a shop. John Schwanner ran a facility called Sacramento Sky Ranch and wrote the Sky Ranch engine manual back in 1991. His method for judging a cam lobe is a clean penny. Drag it across the top of the lobe. If the penny leaves copper behind on the steel, that surface is rough enough to need resurfacing. Continental's official method is barely more advanced. Their Directive SID 05-1B tells the mechanic to probe any surface deformity with a pick. If the pick catches, the camshaft most likely needs replacing. Getting eyes on the cam at all is the hard part. Bush notes you need a flexible bore scope with a probe of 5.5 mm or thinner. On some engines, that job runs from easy to nearly impossible, depending on how the case was built, which is why the 3rd test matters most. Paul McBride spent his career inside Lycoming, and he published the cheapest early warning available. Rinse your oil filter in avgas or a clear solvent. Pour the contents through a paper towel, let it dry, then drag a pencil magnet across the debris. Early cam spalling shows up as a black, fuzzy material clinging to the magnet. Oil analysis will not see it. The particles at that stage are too small for the lab. By the time they are big enough, roughly 200 to 300 hours of further wear have already gone by. On the hardware side, dehydrator plugs cost about $20 each. A commercial engine dehumidifier runs $1,200. A multi-point preheater system is $1,260 plus 2 to 5 hours of installation labor, against $1,600 for one cylinder. One cylinder pays for a decade of dry air. And then there is the question none of this settles. Continental's directive states that a certain amount of pitting on the toe of the cam lobe is acceptable. The case-hardened outer layer runs about 15 thousandths of an inch deep. So long as the pits do not cut through it, the document says there is little risk of accelerated deterioration. For minor distress, keep flying and look again at 100 hours or 12 months, whichever comes first. Mike Bush goes further. He has said he never once heard of an engine quitting because of a spalled lifter or cam lobe. So when your shop opens the case and shows you pitting, you are looking at 2 verdicts sitting on the same piece of metal. One says, overhaul it. The other says, read the directive, fly it, and check again in a year. That question does not have a single answer. It has an invoice attached to whichever answer your shop believes. Which is it in your hangar right now? The heater plugged in all winter, or dry air pushed through the oil filler? One of those is protecting the cam and the other one is feeding it. Tell me which one you run. Every hour you do not fly gets billed back to you later, at shop rate, by a part you have never laid eyes on. There is a second clock running on the airframe while that one runs on the engine, and that one grounds airplanes permanently. Subscribe to Sky Ranch and you will be there when we open it up.